A man standing at the pinnacle of Hollywood success, millions of dollars in his bank account, fans screaming his name across the globe, and a franchise that literally changed the landscape of action cinema forever. But behind those signature muscles, that gravelly voice, and that tough guy persona lies a story so heartbreaking, so filled with loss and pain, that would bring even the strongest person to their knees. This is the untold tragedy of Vin Diesel, and trust me, by the end of the story, you'll never look at him the same way again. Before we dive into the darkness that has haunted one of Hollywood's biggest stars, let me take you back to where it all began, because Vin Diesel's tragedy didn't start when he became famous. It started the day he was born, July 18, 1967, in Alameda County, California. A baby boy entered the world, but he wasn't born as Vin Diesel. His real name was Mark Sinclair, and from the very first breath he took, he was already dealing with something that would haunt him his entire life. You see, Mark never knew his biological father. Not a single memory, not a photograph, not even a name. His mother, Dolores Charlene Sinclair, an astrologer trying to make ends meet, had a relationship with a man whose identity remains a mystery to this very day. Think about that for a moment. Imagine growing up without knowing half of who you are, where you came from, what blood runs through your veins. Vin Diesel has openly admitted that this void in his identity has been one of the most painful aspects of his existence, stating that he's always had less information than he would have liked about his origins, about his roots, about the man who gave him life, but was never there to see what his son would become. But the story gets even more complex and painful. Vin's mother eventually connected with a man named Irving H. Vincent, an African-American acting instructor and theater manager, who would become Vin's stepfather. Irving legally adopted young Mark and his twin brother Paul, giving them a father figure, giving them structure, giving them love. But here's what makes this even more heartbreaking. Vin Diesel has stated that when he was born in 1967, his parents' relationship would have been illegal in certain parts of the United States due to anti-miscegenation laws. Let that sink in. The very existence of Vin Diesel and his family was considered criminal in some states. The love between his mother and biological father was forbidden, outlawed, punishable by law. This created an identity crisis that would follow Vin throughout his entire career. He's spoken about being of ambiguous ethnicity, never quite fitting into any one box, always existing in the spaces between, never fully belonging anywhere. Can you imagine the psychological toll that takes on a young child? Being raised in New York's Greenwich Village, looking in the mirror and seeing a face that reflected multiple cultures, but being unable to claim any of them fully because half of his heritage was completely unknown to him? Growing up in New York wasn't easy for the Sinclair twins. Their stepfather, Irving, worked as a theater manager, which meant the family lived in artists' housing projects. These weren't glamorous neighborhoods. This was gritty New York in the 70s and 80s, where survival meant being tough, being street smart, being ready for whatever came your way. Young Mark found himself drawn to the theater world through his stepfather's influence. At just 7 years old, he and some friends broke into the theater for the New City in Greenwich Village with the intention of vandalizing it. But something unexpected happened. Instead of calling the police or throwing these kids out, the theater's artistic director, Crystal Field, saw something in them. She offered them roles in the upcoming production. This moment, this single act of compassion and vision, changed Mark Sinclair's life forever. He discovered acting, and more importantly, he discovered a place where he could be someone else, where he could escape confusion of his identity, where he could create characters who knew exactly who they were even if he didn't. But let's fast forward to those early years of small theater productions and big dreams, because the real tragedy, the real heartbreak in Vin Diesel's story, starts when he tried to make it in Hollywood. After attending Hunter College in New York, where he studied creative writing and began to understand the power of storytelling, Vin made the decision that thousands of aspiring actors make every single year. He packed his bags and headed to Los Angeles, ready to conquer Hollywood, ready to become a star. What he found instead was rejection. Brutal, soul-crushing, identity-destroying rejection. He would walk into audition after audition, and casting directors would look at him with confusion. They didn't know what to do with him. He was too ethnically ambiguous to fit into the narrow boxes that Hollywood had created. He wasn't white enough for the white roles. He wasn't black enough for the black roles. He wasn't Latino enough for the Latino roles. He was too muscular to be the romantic lead, too intelligent looking to be just a muscle, too intense to be the comic relief. Time after time after time, he would hear the same devastating words. You just don't fit. Those 3 words, repeated hundreds of times over years of struggle, would break most people. And they nearly broke Vin Diesel. The financial struggle was real and suffocating. To survive, Vin took whatever work he could find. He worked as a bouncer in New York nightclubs, which is actually where he got the nickname Vin Diesel. His friends started calling him Vin because of his last name, Vincent, and Diesel because of the energy he seemed to run on during those long nights working the door. But bouncing wasn't a career. It was survival. He would work all night, dealing with drunk patrons, breaking up fights, maintaining order in chaos, and then during the day, he would drag his exhausted body to auditions, only to face more rejection. The cycle was brutal and unending. Most people would have given up. Most people would have gone back to New York, gotten a regular job, settled for a life that was safe and predictable. But something inside Vin Diesel refused to quit. Maybe it was the pain of growing up without knowing his father. Maybe it was a determination to prove that he belonged somewhere. Maybe it was just pure, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Whatever it was, it kept him going. But after years of rejection, Vin Diesel made a decision that would change everything. If Hollywood wouldn't give him a role, he would create his own. He would write, direct, produce, and star in his own film. He scraped together every dollar he had earned bouncing, every penny he had saved, every bit of money he could borrow. He gathered a total of $3,000 and decided to make a short film. Not just any short film, but one that would speak directly to the pain he had been experiencing for years. In 1995, he wrote and directed Multifacial, a 20-minute short film about a multiracial actor struggling to find work in Hollywood because he doesn't fit into any ethnic categories. It was autobiographical. It was raw. It was painfully honest. Vin poured every ounce of his frustration, his anger, his pain, his identity crisis into those 20 minutes of film. He shot it on the cheapest equipment he could find, in whatever locations would let him film for free, with friends as crew members, working 18-hour days, editing late into the night, pushing himself to the absolute limit of exhaustion because this film had to work. It had to matter. It was his last shot at making his dream a reality. And then something incredible happened. Multifacial was selected to screen at the 1995 Cannes Film Festival. Cannes, one of the most prestigious film festivals in the entire world. This short film, made for $3,000 by a struggling actor/bouncer who couldn't get cast in anything, was going to be shown alongside films from major studios with million-dollar budgets. But even more significantly, the film caught the attention of someone who could actually change Vin's life. Steven Spielberg saw Multifacial and was impressed by this unknown actor-writer-director who had so much talent, so much hunger, so much authenticity. Spielberg cast Vin in Saving Private Ryan in 1998 in the role of Private Adrian Caparzo. It wasn't a huge role, but it was in a Spielberg film. It was a legitimate credit. It was validation that Vin Diesel belonged in this industry after all those years of being told he didn't. You would think this would be the beginning of the happy part of the story, right? Struggling actor gets his big break, becomes a star, lives happily ever after. But that's not how Vin Diesel's story goes. Not even close. Because just when things started to look up, just when doors began to open, just when it seemed like all that suffering might actually lead to something beautiful, Vin would experience professional disappointments that would test him over and over again. After Saving Private Ryan, he wrote, directed, produced, and starred in another feature film called Strays in 1997, showing he was more than just an actor. He was a filmmaker with vision. Then in 2000, he landed a role that should have launched him into superstardom, Riddick in Pitch Black. The film was dark, gritty, and showcased Vin's ability to carry a movie as the lead. It had modest box office success, but critics recognized that a star was born. Then came 2001, and everything changed. Vin Diesel was cast as Dominic Toretto in The Fast and the Furious. This role, this character, this franchise would become synonymous with Vin Diesel's name. Dom Toretto wasn't just a character. He was an icon. The film was a massive success, launching one of the most profitable franchises in Hollywood history. Vin Diesel had finally made it. He was a bona fide movie star. His face was on billboards. His name was above the title. He was commanding multi-million-dollar paychecks. Everything he had suffered through, all those years of rejection and struggle, had led to this moment of triumph. But here's where the tragedy really begins to unfold in ways that nobody could predict it, because success in Hollywood doesn't mean the pain stops. Sometimes it just changes form. After the first Fast and Furious film, Vin made a decision that many people still criticize him for to this day. He chose not to return for Too Fast, Too Furious, the sequel. He wanted to pursue other opportunities, prove he was more than just a one-character actor, show Hollywood that he had range and depth. He took roles in XXX in 2002, which was successful, but then came a string of films that didn't perform as expected. The Chronicles of Riddick in 2004, while having a cult following now, underperformed at the box office, considering its massive budget. Then came The Pacifier in 2005, a family comedy that was financially successful but made many fans question his choices. But the real disasters were yet to come. Babylon AD in 2008 was a critical and commercial failure that Vin himself has distanced himself from, reportedly having major disagreements with the director about the final cut of the film. The project was meant to be a serious science fiction film, but it was released in a butchered form that satisfied nobody. Not the director, not Vin, and certainly not audiences or critics. Then there was The Last Witch Hunter in 2015, a fantasy film that Vin was passionate about, that he believed could launch another franchise that he had invested himself in creatively and financially. It bombed. Hard. Opening in fourth place domestically with just $10.8 million. It was his second worst wide-release opening ever. Despite his hopes for sequels and building another cinematic universe, the film disappeared from theaters quickly and became yet another entry in the list of Vin Diesel projects that failed to find an audience. Each of these failures took a toll, not just financially, although they certainly affected his market value and bargaining power, but emotionally and psychologically. Imagine working your entire life to become a star, finally achieving that dream, and then watching project after project fail despite your best efforts. The whisper started in Hollywood that Vin Diesel couldn't carry a film outside of the Fast and Furious franchise, that he wasn't actually a movie star, he was just Dom Toretto, that without that character, he had no draw. Those whispers hurt, but they weren't the worst pain Vin would experience. Not by a long shot. Because on November 30th, 2013, everything changed for Vin Diesel in a way that no amount of professional failure could compare to. That was the day that Paul Walker died. Let me tell you about Vin and Paul's relationship, because to understand the tragedy of what happened, you need to understand what they meant to each other. When they were cast together in The Fast and the Furious back in 2001, they were just two actors working on an action movie about street racing. But something clicked between them. Something real. Something that transcended the typical Hollywood friendship. Paul Walker wasn't just Vin's co-star. He became Vin's brother in every sense of the word, except biological. They spent years working together, traveling together, promoting films together, but more importantly, they spent time together away from cameras. Paul would come to Vin's house for dinner. They would talk about life, about family, about their dreams and fears. Paul met Vin's partner, Paloma Jimenez. He met Vin's children. He became part of Vin's family. And Vin became part of Paul's family. They weren't acting for the cameras when they talk about being family in those Fast and Furious films. That brotherhood was real. That love was authentic. That bond was unbreakable. So when Vin got the call on that November day in 2013, when someone told him that Paul had been in a car accident, that he was gone, that his brother was dead, something inside Vin Diesel broke that has never fully healed. Paul Walker wasn't speeding in a street race like something out of their movies. He was a passenger in a car driven by his friend Roger Rodas. They were leaving a charity event for Paul's disaster relief organization, Reach Out Worldwide. They crashed into a tree. The car burst into flames. Both men died at the scene. Paul Walker was only 40 years old. He had so much life left to live, so many films left to make, so much good left to do in the world. And just like that, He was gone. Vin has described getting that news as one of the darkest moments of his entire life. The man who had survived growing up without knowing his father, who had pushed through years of rejection and failure, who had built himself up from nothing to become a movie star, was completely destroyed by this loss. In the days following Paul's death, Vin was photographed looking absolutely devastated. His face, usually so composed and strong, was puffy from crying. His eyes were red. He looked like a man who had lost a piece of his soul. And maybe he had. Vin went to Paul's mother, Cheryl and Walker, after the accident. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that he would be there for her and Paul's family, to promise that Paul's legacy would never be forgotten. But something unexpected happened in that meeting. Cheryl ended up comforting Vin. This mother, who had just lost her son in the most tragic way imaginable, was the one giving strength to Vin Diesel. She told him that Paul would want him to be strong, that Paul would want him to finish Furious 7, that Paul would want the franchise to continue. Vin has said that he doesn't know how he would have gotten through those first days without her strength, without her grace, without her giving him permission to grieve, but also to keep going. But the pain didn't stop there. It got worse in ways that are almost too difficult to talk about. You see, when Paul died, they were in the middle of filming Furious 7. The movie was far from complete. Paul still had major scenes left to shoot. The studio had to make a decision: scrap the film entirely and lose hundreds of millions of dollars, or find a way to finish it without their star. They decided to finish it. But that meant Vin Diesel had to return to set and work on this movie without his brother. He had to film scenes where he was supposed to be interacting with Paul, except Paul wasn't there anymore. They used Paul's brothers Caleb and Cody Walker as stand-ins, with CGI technology completing Paul's remaining scenes. Imagine how emotionally devastating that must have been for Vin, to be on set, looking at people who resembled Paul, who moved like Paul, who were trying to embody Paul, but knowing that Paul himself was gone forever, to have to deliver lines about family and brotherhood, while feeling like his own family had been ripped apart, to have to be strong for the crew, for the studio, for the fans, when all he wanted to do was fall apart. During interviews promoting Furious 7, Vin would frequently become emotional when talking about Paul. There's video footage of him walking out of interviews because he simply couldn't continue talking about his lost brother without breaking down. In one particularly heart-wrenching moment during an interview with Dean Richards, Vin was asked about Paul, and you can see in real time how the grief overwhelms him. His voice cracks, his eyes well up with tears. He tries to compose himself, but he can't. And he eventually has to leave because the pain is too much. This wasn't acting. This wasn't some publicity stunt. This was a man whose heart was shattered, trying to hold himself together in public, but finding it impossible. The world watched Vin Diesel grieve in real time, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. But wait, because the story gets even more emotional, even more devastating. On March 16th, 2015, just a few weeks before Furious 7 was set to be released, Vin Diesel's partner Paloma Jimenez gave birth to their third child, a daughter. This should have been a moment of pure joy, of new life, of hope and happiness. But it was also deeply bittersweet, because Vin made a decision about his daughter's name that would forever tie her to the man he had lost. He named her Pauline. Pauline, after Paul Walker. When Vin announced this publicly on the Today Show, he became so emotional he could barely speak. He said that when his daughter was born, when he cut the umbilical cord, he felt Paul's presence in that room. He felt his brother there with him, watching over this new life, this new member of the family that Paul would never get to meet but would always be connected to through her name. Vin described it as Paul giving him his final gift, being there for this moment even though he was gone. The weight of that love, that loss, that eternal bond was almost too much for Vin to bear. Every year since Paul's death, on November 30th, Vin Diesel posts tributes to his fallen brother. These posts are never just casual memorial messages. They're deeply personal, painfully vulnerable expressions of ongoing grief. Vin writes about how much he misses Paul, how he thinks about him every single day, how he wishes Paul could be there to see his children grow up, to see the success of the franchise they built together, to just be there as his friend and brother. The pain in these messages never diminishes. Even years later, even as time passes, Vin's grief remains as raw and real as it was that first day. Because that's the thing about losing someone you truly love. You don't just get over it. You don't move on. You learn to carry the pain with you, to integrate it into who you are, to find ways to honor their memory while still trying to live your own life. And Vin has tried to honor Paul in every way he can. He walked Paul's daughter, Meadow Walker, down the aisle at her wedding in October 2021. This moment was incredibly significant because Paul couldn't be there for his daughter's wedding day. So Vin stepped in to fill that role. Meadow has said that Vin has been like an uncle to her, staying connected to Paul's family, making sure that the bonds they formed during Paul's lifetime haven't been broken by death. Vin has also ensured that every Fast and Furious film since Paul's death has honored him in some way, whether through dedications, references to his character Brian O'Connor, or by maintaining the themes of family and brotherhood that Paul embodied. The end of Furious 7, where Vin's character Dom and Paul's character Brian drive side by side one last time before their roads diverge, set to his Khalifa and Charlie Puth's See You Again, is one of the most emotional sequences in action movie history. It's not just characters saying goodbye. It's Vin saying goodbye to Paul, and millions of fans saying goodbye alongside them. But as if losing Paul wasn't enough tragedy for one person to endure, Vin's professional life continued to present challenges and heartbreaks even as he tried to process his grief. The Fast and Furious franchise continued, and it remained successful, but behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. In 2016, during the filming of The Fate of the Furious, tensions between Vin Diesel and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson exploded into public view. Johnson posted on Instagram about unprofessional co-stars, referring to them as candy asses, and making it clear he was talking about male co-stars. Everyone knew he was talking about Vin. The feud went public, with both actors taking subtle and not-so-subtle shots at each other in interviews and social media posts. The details of what caused the rift have been debated endlessly. Some reports say it was about work ethic, with The Rock allegedly frustrated by Vin's frequent lateness to set. Others say it was about creative control, with Vin as producer having final say over aspects of the film that The Rock disagreed with. Some people speculate it was about ego, two alpha males clashing over who was really the star of the franchise. But here's what makes this situation particularly tragic for Vin. He was still grieving Paul. He was trying to continue this franchise that he and Paul had built together, trying to honor Paul's memory, trying to keep the family together, and now his work environment, the place that was supposed to feel like home, had become hostile and uncomfortable. Reports from the set indicated that Vin and The Rock would film their scenes separately to avoid interaction. The Rock eventually stopped appearing in the main Fast and Furious films, getting his own spin-off Hobbs and Shaw instead, which Vin reportedly was not happy about, feeling it diluted the main franchise. In recent years, there have been attempts at reconciliation, with both actors making public statements about putting the past behind them, but the damage to the family feeling of the franchise was done. And for Vin, who talks constantly about the Fast family and how important those relationships are to him, having that family fractured and dysfunctional must have been another painful wound. Then there are the personal challenges that Vin has faced, but rarely talks about publicly. He's notoriously private about his personal life, which is interesting for someone who is constantly in the public eye. His relationship with Paloma Jimenez, the mother of his 3 children, has never been conventionally traditional. They've never married, despite being together for nearly 2 decades and having 3 children together. There have been persistent rumors over the years about their relationship status, about whether they're together or separated, about the nature of their arrangement. Vin has never really addressed these rumors directly, choosing instead to keep that part of his life private. But there are hints that things may not be as picture-perfect as a curated social media post suggest. At one point, there were reports that Vin had separated from Paloma but allowed her to stay in their home, that they were co-parenting their children despite no longer being romantically involved, that Vin was prioritizing his children's stability over typical relationship expectations. Whether these reports are true or just tabloid speculation, what's clear is that Vin's personal life has had its share of complications and challenges. There have also been legal issues and accusations that have caused significant stress and difficulty for Vin. While I don't want to delve into unverified allegations, it's important to acknowledge that being a public figure means dealing with scrutiny, accusations, lawsuits, and the court of public opinion in ways that can be exhausting and demoralizing. Every decision is analyzed. Every relationship is questioned. Every misstep is magnified. For someone like Vin, who already struggled with identity issues from childhood, who faced endless rejection early in his career, who lost his best friend and brother traumatically, these additional pressures and controversies add layers of pain to an already heavy burden. And then there's a career reality that Vin faces now. He's in his mid-50s, an age when action stars typically start to transition away from doing their own stunts, start looking for different types of roles, start thinking about legacy rather than maintaining their peak. But Vin is still identified primarily, almost exclusively, with Dominic Toretto. The Fast and Furious franchise is both his greatest success and in some ways his greatest limitation. When he tries to do projects outside the franchise, they typically underperform or fail entirely. Bloodshot in 2020, which was supposed to launch a superhero franchise for Valiant Comics, was a box office disappointment. His voice work as Groot in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while beloved, requires him to say only 3 words: "I am Groot." He's a huge movie star who has made billions of dollars at the box office, but he's also somewhat trapped by his own success, unable to break out into new territory, unable to prove he could be something other than Dom Toretto without the box office numbers plummeting. The plans for the Fast and Furious franchise's conclusion have been complicated and difficult. Originally, it was supposed to end with a 10th film. Then it became an 11th film. There have been delays, creative disagreements, scheduling conflicts, and most recently, concerns about whether Vin can physically continue doing these demanding action sequences at his age. Every delay, every complication, every problem with getting these final films made is a reminder that this chapter of Vin's life, the one that defined his career and gave him everything he is professionally, is coming to an end. And what comes after? That's the question that must terrify him. What is Vin Diesel without Dom Toretto? What is he without the Fast and Furious franchise? Can he reinvent himself in his mid-50s and find new success? Or will he become another cautionary tale of an action star who peaked and then faded into obscurity, taking increasingly desperate roles to stay relevant? But perhaps the deepest tragedy, the one that cuts to the core of who Vin Diesel is the ongoing identity struggle that has never really been resolved. He still doesn't know who his biological father is. He still can't answer basic questions about half of his heritage, half of his DNA, half of who he is. In recent years, there have been discussions about him potentially taking a DNA test to learn more about his ancestry, but Vin has expressed ambivalence about it. Part of him wants to know, wants that missing piece of the puzzle, wants to finally understand a complete picture of his identity. But another part of him is afraid. What if the answer is disappointing? What if it doesn't provide the closure he's seeking? What if knowing is worse than not knowing? So he remains in this limbo, this space of uncertainty about his own identity that he's existed in his entire life. For someone who makes his living pretending to be other people, who puts on characters like masks, who has built a career on creating fictional identities, the fact that he doesn't fully know his own real identity is a profound and ongoing source of pain. And that pain has manifested in ways that are sometimes visible to the public. There have been moments where Vin has seemed lost, unfocused, struggling. His social media posts are sometimes cryptic and melancholy, hinting at deeper struggles beneath the surface. His public appearances sometimes show a man who looks tired, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. During the promotion of recent Fast and Furious films, even as he smiles for cameras and does interviews, there's a sadness in his eyes, a weight he's carrying that never quite leaves. It's the weight of loss, of Paul's absence, of knowing that the thing he built with his brother has to continue without him. It's the weight of time passing, of getting older, of facing mortality. It's the weight of unresolved questions about identity, family, belonging. It's the weight of professional pressure, of being responsible for a multi-billion-dollar franchise, of knowing that thousands of people's jobs depend on his ability to keep playing this character. It's the weight of personal struggles, relationship complications, legal battles, and the constant scrutiny of being famous. What makes Vin Diesel's tragedy particularly heartbreaking is that he's achieved what most people would consider extraordinary success. He's wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. He's famous on a global scale. He's created iconic characters that will be remembered for generations. He's built a franchise that has entertained hundreds of millions of people worldwide. He's provided for his family, created opportunities for others, and accomplished things that seemed impossible when he was that struggling bouncer in New York. By every objective measure, Vin Diesel has won. He made it. He achieved the dream. But the dream came with a cost that nobody could have predicted. The cost of losing his brother Paul in a way that mirrors the very films they made together, creating a painful irony that must haunt Vin every single day. The cost of professional failures and disappointments that remind him how fragile success really is. The cost of public feuds and relationship complications that make him question who he can really trust. The cost of carrying unanswered questions about his identity and origins that may never be resolved. The cost of the weight of legacy, of knowing that how this story ends will determine how he's remembered. And right now, the ending is uncertain and complicated. Looking at Vin Diesel today, you see a man caught between triumph and tragedy, between success and sorrow, between the public persona of the tough action star and the private reality of someone carrying an enormous amount of pain. You see someone who has everything and nothing simultaneously, who has achieved his wildest dreams while losing what mattered most, who has become one of the biggest stars in the world while still searching for basic answers about who he even is. That's the real tragedy of Vin Diesel. Not that he failed, but that he succeeded beyond all expectations and found that success couldn't fill the voids in his heart and soul. Not that he never made it, but that making it didn't solve the fundamental struggles he's carried his entire life. Not that he's unloved, but that he's lost someone he loved more than words can express and has to keep going without them. Every time Vin Diesel appears in a Fast and Furious film now, every time he delivers a line about family, every time Dom Toretto talks about never leaving a man behind or protecting the ones you love, there's a subtext that audiences might not fully grasp. Vin isn't just acting, he's living it. He's speaking from a place of real loss, real pain, real understanding of what it means to lose family, to carry grief, to keep going when part of you wants to stop. That's why those scenes resonate so powerfully with audiences. That's why people feel something genuine in Vin's performance, even in these over-the-top action spectacles. Because underneath the explosions and car chases and impossible stunts, there's real emotion, real vulnerability, real humanity coming from a man who knows what loss feels like and is trying to honor someone who meant the world to him. As Vin approaches the end of the Fast and Furious franchise, as he faces an uncertain future, as he continues to carry all these burdens and struggles, one has to wonder what the next chapter will bring. Will he find peace? Will he find new creative fulfillment? Will he finally find answers to the questions about his identity that have haunted him since childhood? Will he be able to process his grief over Paul in a way that allows him to move forward without feeling like he's leaving his brother behind? Will he find personal happiness in his relationships? Will he be able to prove he's more than just Dom Toretto? These questions remain unanswered, and maybe that's fitting for someone whose entire life has been defined by unanswered questions and unresolved pain. The tragedy of Vin Diesel isn't a simple story with a clear moral or lesson. It's a complex, ongoing human experience of someone trying to navigate success and loss, identity and ambiguity, public expectation, and private struggle. It's the story of a man who seems to have everything, but is still searching for something essential that he's never quite found. It's the story of achieving your dreams and discovering that dreams achieved don't erase the pain of the past or prevent the pain of the future. It's the story of family, both the one you're born into with all its mysteries and complications, and the one you choose with all its love and inevitable heartbreak when you lose members of it. It's ultimately a very human story about a very famous person, reminding us that no amount of success, wealth, or fame can protect you from the fundamental struggles and tragedies that define the human experience. Vin Diesel is living proof that you can be on top of the world and still be broken inside, that you can have millions of fans and still feel alone, that you can be seen by everyone and still feel invisible in ways that matter most, and that, more than anything else, is what makes a story beyond heartbreaking. Not the dramatic moments or the obvious losses, but the ongoing, everyday struggle of a man trying to make sense of life that has given him so much and taken away so much in equal measure, leaving him somewhere in between, still searching, still grieving, still hoping, still fighting, still standing, but never quite whole.